or maybe before I show within the system what a workflow looks like and how do you start developing, so I would like to just give you a very brief background about why we have to use workflows and what could be the significance or what makes actually the business actually to decide about they have to go with the workflows. So we would be talking about what is business process, and then what is the need of redefining these business processes, and what would be the role of workflows, and also we will be looking at we will be trying to understand what is exactly a people-centric process, and then we'll be finally looking at some frequently used terms within the workflow development environment, and then I would like to show you a very simple demo as I have to give you a sneak peek of how does a workflow looks like from system level. So in that case, I just give you a very simple example of how do we create a workflow and what are the transactions of the workflow and how do we create different steps. So that would be the agenda of this demonstration. So first we will be starting with a business process. So what do you understand, or how do you define a business process? In layman terms, I'm not going to read the same statement whatever that I have just tried to present in the PPT, but let me just try to put it in this way. A business process is a set of steps or set of transactions or a set of or a unit of transactions which are grouped together to process or to achieve a logical and valid result as per the business. So that means, for example, to give you from SAP ERP perspective, from SAP context, if I have to let's say create a material, okay, then what I would do is that first I have to go navigate to the transaction, and then I have to create a material, and then I have to get it approved, or this specific material, whatever that I'm just trying to create within the system, it has to be enabled or validated by a responsible person, and once upon his approval, the data or the master data, whatever that we are going to create within the system, has to go and sit in the transparent tables or within the database dictionary, right? So this is just a way how you handle technically of creating material. But when you look at on the top of this, you also have a functional process. So what is a functional process? So you can't just go ahead and you can't just blindly go ahead and create a material as you wish. But again, to create a material, you require a business case, or you should require an event or a kind of approvals. So why they have to create this material? What is the reason of creating this material? Or what is the who is going to be handle this material, and what is the place or a warehouse where this material is going to be stored? So there are so many parameters which has to be considered when we talk about a business process. So what we were trying to understand is, when I said in the first case, we were trying to understand from technical steps or technical process, like you navigate to the transaction, you create material, and you save in the database. But when it comes to a functional perspective, you have to understand, you have to read the system, you have to understand the customer process, so that you can just go ahead and create, and you can just understand what is the starting point of creating, or what is the initiation of creating this material. Now let's forget about, in SAP terms, let's forget about this SAP material and everything. Let's try to take a very simple example, the way in which we everyday do, like booking a cab or booking a movie ticket from Book My Show, or maybe if you are trying to use Meru cabs, or maybe you just consider that example. So usually what happens, if you just try to look at the taxi order booking or process, so what do you usually do? So first you will create your own user ID login, and then you log into within your user credentials, and you start looking at the destination and source, and then you start choosing the time, and then you just push the information to the vendor or the person who is about to provide the cab facility, or the service provider who is about to provide you the cab. So what is the things that you have done before submitting this act? You try to insert some data, and you try to if anything, any information is missing within the request, whatever that you want to send, the system might, or the application might validate that information, and then it tries to push the data, whatever that you have included in the form, to the service provider. Now that is your first step. That is what actually you did from your point of view. But when the same request goes to the service provider end, now the service provider is not just, he can't just blindly decide that okay, he can just provide it. He has to go on some set of different validations. Now the first thing you can just consider that maybe in the Mumbai you might be belonging to some north region, and at that point of time the service, the request, whatever that you are sending has to be handled by the people or the department who is actually belonging to the north region area, right? So but let's say so the service provider has to first validate that whether the request is from north, south, east, west, and then he has to forward it to the appropriate region. And then within that region, now again the providers have to validate whether they have the availability of cabs within that specific period or the time whatever that you are requesting. And if in case they don't have a specific period or if they don't have the availability, then they can again come back to you asking, saying that, you know, I don't have a cab available on this time, but you can choose some other time. So you can also propose. So there is again a kind of communication that is happening between you and your service provider. Now the next step is, if you wish, then you can choose alternative, or if you don't wish, you can withdraw your request or you can cancel your request. So what you have done is that, so in order to handle this whole process, this is what actually we call a business process. So what you did, the first step, the first task is you submit a request, and the second task is the service provider has to again send it to the appropriate region, which is the second task, and the third task is the people or the service provider has to validate your data, and based on the information whatever that you have provided within the request, he will try to validate the data, and then he may again come back to you and confirm. So which is again a task that he has to perform, which will be going to and fro between your service provider and the initiator or you, right? So there are different tasks involved in booking a cab. In the same way, even in any business process. Now forget about this general example, whatever that I just gave. The reason why I just tried to give you this very simple is that we have to understand what is a process or what is a business process. So if you try to implement, or if you just talk with the Meru cabs that they want to implement SAP, then how do you understand that? What is the what are the processes that are involved in confirming the cab to the customer? So that is what actually you have to understand whenever you are dealing, or whenever the customer is interested in going and implementing workflows within his business process. So the first thing, as a workflow consultant, what you have to be aware is that you have to understand the customer business process. So that is what, so once you understand this business process, then the next thing is you have to identify the gaps and how can you improvise the time, the efficiency, and how can you engage the people. All right, so are there any disturbances? Can you hear me, Praveen?
Yeah.
All right. So any questions?
No. Still
all right.
Not, no.
So
yeah.
Okay. All right. So that is what actually giving you an understanding of what our process is. So as you can see in this graph, when the requester tries to register and the administrative office guys are trying to review the request of the initiator or the requester, and then they are trying to validate it whether they have availability or not. If in case they don't have, they might reject it, and if in case they have, they approve it and they allocate a car. And that is how actually, and this can be extended to a level that if it is rejected, then they can even send a kind of notification. So that can also be a one task. Okay, sending a notification itself is one more task, a background task. That is what a process is. So why I'm trying to make you understand, why I'm trying to give you more importance about understanding the processes. So whenever you are going to implement workflows for any process, the first three things that you have to understand is, three important points that you have to understand is, what is the frequency of the business process that gets executed every day? What is the frequency of execution of the same process? So it can be for couple of times on a day, or it can be 10 times per day, or it can be 20 times. What is the frequency? How many number of times the same business process is executed? Now the second thing is, how many people are involved in understanding or in making this process successful? So there can be n number of people involved in a process. So the n can be either 2, either 3, either 10. All right. So the next thing is, what is the total duration it is going to take if we don't automate this process? So you are trying to get the difference between, or what you are trying to understand, how you can get the difference and what would be the advantage of implementing workflows on a business process. So the definition of workflow, as you can see that the reasons why we have to redefine a business process is that
sorry to interrupt you. Can you just go on back? I just want to ask questions. So here actually there are 3 tasks, right?
Yep.
Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you.
So here task is like. Yeah, okay. So here there are 3 tasks. Okay. So each task has its own approval. Okay.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay.
So every task has its own approval. Then first, when this overall view schedule is it's get approved, then it will be go to the further task, right?
Exactly.
So means in our real scenarios, that task contains how many such kind of that boxes? So can you just have a brief on that?
I'll try to demonstrate these whole things in the coming slides, because we have a slide which talks about how does a task look like and what is the requirements to create a task and how many types of tasks we have. So I'll just make you understand. So the whole idea of presenting you this slide is to understand what is a business process and how do you make a business process, what would be the starting point and what should be the ending point. A business process should always have a definite starting and ending point. It can't have an unlimited number of steps or processes or tasks. So the process can never be a never-ending process. It should always have a definite number of tasks that are involved to complete the process. All right. So that is the main interest or the takeaway from the slide. Right.
Okay. No problem.
All right. So coming back, I was just trying to make you understand why we have to. I was just trying to make you understand like what are the 3 points that you have to understand when you are trying to go with the decision of we have to go and implement workflows. So in the business process, now let's say in the same process in the previous example which I was just trying to mention you, that if the same cab booking process is done manually, all right, so maybe you can just assume that the requester might all along traveling to the service provider, and manually he might be interacting it with the service provider, and the service provider again have to make some calls, and sometimes the other people might not be available, and in that case he might not get the right information or the correct information, whatever that he's expecting within the stipulated time. Right. So there are so many factors. So the first thing why we have to redefine a business process is that about your speed, the speed and time in the sense, speed in the sense, don't consider it as you submit you get the result. It is not about that. The context of speed here over is we are not trying to delay the work. We are just making sure that the work flows from one person to another person in the right time to the right people at right location. Right. So that is what exactly I mean by that speed and time. So whenever you are trying to say that as soon as you submit it, it has to go to the administrative office, that is the right people or department within the right time, and the administrative people have to react to your request within the stipulated time. So the they have to again send it to the next level or the next department so that they can come back to you within the amount of time whatever that they have. Let's say you have booked a cab for next 5 hours. After next 5 hours, so it is the department responsibility or the service provider responsibility to react, to make a communication about the status of your request. So that is what actually I mean by speed and time. It is not about getting the information or booking the cab speed. You are trying to say that the request or the request whatever that you have just sent, it is sent to the right person in the right time within the right place. All right. Now the next thing is about the performance. So once you try to performance in the aspect of there are some activities which are done by the background in the background, and there are some activities which a person has to be involved. So in that case, let's say there are the activities which doesn't require any background, which doesn't require any manual intervention, and still the process, the people are trying to get the information. So in that case, the performance of the request, the performance of the process comes down because it is delaying. The request is held in somewhere because of lack of information. So you can increase the performance. So that was one of the points which I mentioned, that what is the difference that you are going to achieve once you go ahead and implement the workflows for any specific business process. The next thing is about monitoring. Monitoring, obviously monitoring is either from customer or either from vendor. Both monitoring should be available, it should be transparent. Now as a customer, he might send a request and he should be eligible, or he should be able to see or know what is the status of his request. At the same time, as a vendor, he should be able to understand whether you are going to accept the request or the proposed terms, whatever that they have proposed to you or sent to you. So both the monitoring activities has to be done. Here, what I mean by steward activities are nothing but validating the data of whatever the request that he has sent. For example, in the previous example, as I said, the administrative office guys have to validate from which particular region this request has come, and it has to be forwarded to the respective region or locality. Right, so let's say the north region, it has come from the north region, so it has to go to the north region people. So that kind of validations. And if in case, let's say you are trying to create a cab for previous day, excuse me. So in that case, again, they have to say, or the application has to show there itself that your the dates, whatever that you are trying to enter, is not valid. So these kind of things are nothing but your steward activities. Maintaining the auditing information is something like about getting the year-end results of how many cabs and how many requests they have created and what is the total analysis. So you even can get auditing information if in case you are looking at cost factor. Obviously, cost factor is one of the important things that you have to consider. These are things which actually will be dealt actually at a very high level. As a workflow developer, we won't be actually able to understand what exactly a cost factor is and how does it significantly helps you to understand as a at the workflow developer consultant. But cost factor, to just give you a very brief idea what exactly a cost factor is. Let's say the same let's say if the same booking process, whatever that we just discussed, so it is taking a time of 2 days manually. It is taking 2 days to understand whether they have a cab or not. And the next thing is that is one of the time, how much time or what is the cost of time that you are investing to successfully complete the process. Now the second thing, from the transactional process or from the finance process. Now let's say if you just try to implement the workflows, okay, and you have to understand, you have to make the people or the resources or the employees of the organization or the service provider to understand how to make use of work. So in that case, again, what are the training costs that are achieved, or what are the training costs that has to be included in order to ramp up the whole employee resources, right? So that is actually, to just give you a very simple example. So apart from this, there are so many attributes, but at this level point of time, you don't have to really worry about what actually a cost factor is. The final point, which is very important, that can be achieved with the workflows, is you are always trying to engage people. That is what I said. Again, I'm just trying to repeat how you are trying to engage the people. You are sending the work or the task to the right person, to his inbox. So at any point of time, the person can't just escape, or he can't just avoid the work, whatever that is available in his inbox. So there is a way how we send the tasks to the people. So I'm just going to show you in the demo in a couple of moments. We are about to see the demo. How do we send this task to the right person, to the right people? Okay, so what does exactly I mean by engaging people is that you are always making sure that you are sending the task or whatever the responsibility or whatever the role that he actually holds on the responsibilities, whatever he has to do, you are making sure that all these tasks and activities, whatever he is responsible for, you are placing them in his inbox. Right, so these are the reasons that we have to consider whenever we are going to redefine a process or a business process, right? Now, what would be the impact of processes by SAP Workflow? Now, since we are dealing with SAP Workflow, so obviously it makes a sense that we have to understand we don't have anything to do with cab booking process, but in more terms we have to talk about how does SAP business processes work. The example which I gave called a material creation process, or if in terms of SAP leave approval process, there is a specific leave approval process, leave workflow within the SAP system. So how does it look like? And an employee tries to apply a leave. So how do you get this all approvals, and how do you make sure that the data gets updated within the tables? So you have to understand these all things. So SAP Workflow can be used and redefine to define any business process, which are not yet mapped or not yet, enabled for workflows. Usually what happens is whatever the standard transactions that you have within the SAP system, every transaction can be associated or mapped with a SAP workflow. How do we associate it? Obviously that would be the that actually we are going to look at when we actually start our course, right? But I'll just give you a sneak peek of how do we actually link it. Right, so whatever the by default in SAP system as a box, when you just try to get and put it in your system landscape, what happens is that by default in SAP system there are standard workflows which are already associated or mapped with some of the standard transactions, but there can be some transactions which they don't have any workflows associated with it. So in that case, how do you enable it? So what would be the impact? So it's just more or less like the same thing. Or you just all you just do is that you just try to associate your standard transaction to the workflow, and within the workflow what you do is that you just say that instead of creating everything manually, you are trying to make the workflow as one of the means or process or interface to maintain or to create, to modify, to delete your master data objects that are available in your SAP system. So that is what actually this slide talks about. So as you can see that SAP Business Workflow is particularly suitable for the situations which work processes have to be run through repeatedly. As I said, one of the conditions that when you have to decide to go with the workflow, the first thing is the frequency of the process, okay, and number of people involved in the business process to achieve it. So these are the some of the impacts. That as soon as you just try to start integrating workflows with your standard transactions, so the impact is that instead of creating everything manually, some of the tasks you are delegating to the workflow, saying that these are the tasks which I want to be executed in the background, and these are the tasks that has to be sent to some user, and he has to take some action on this task, or he might have to approve it, or he might have to create this master data object, or he might have to change, delete, or he might have to review before it gets created in the database. So these are some of the features or the process that you can achieve by using SAP workflows or by integrating SAP workflows with standard transactions. Now, in this SAP, as I said, till now I was just trying to say that it is standard transactions. It is not only with the standard transactions. If in case you have any custom transaction and you want to go ahead and integrate workflows with the custom transaction, that is also absolutely possible within the SAP system. Right, so it's not like that. It is not just that always you can use workflows with the standard transactions. There are different possible ways to integrate your workflows with a standard transaction at the same time with your custom transactions. That is also we are going to see in the SAP workflow course. If in case we have created a custom transaction, how do we integrate a custom workflow or a standard workflow? It is not just that always if you are going to create a custom transaction, again you have to create your own workflow. Not at all. You can also try to integrate a standard workflow with your custom or your Z transaction or Z transaction. All right, so as you can see, SAP Business Workflow, it's not just about approving, even it can handle exceptions. And it has different possibilities, and it has different means of providing exceptions, catching exceptions, and alerting the users or the receivers, whoever is going to create or whoever is going to approve. And as I said, you can start workflows we have different possible ways of starting the workflows. One is firing the events or event mechanism, and the other one is if any messages are popped up within the system on your status bar. I hope you might be seeing a lot of messages, errors and everything. Even if any specific message comes on the screen, on the SAP GUI screen, you can initiate a workflow. That is also possible. You can create a workflows, or you can start workflows based on the change documents. What is exactly a change document? Is nothing but a log which actually shows you or presents you what is the previous value of when it was changed or before it was changed, and what is after value or the new value after it got changed. So you can create a change document object where you can store the log of the entries or the tables, whatever that you are going to change within the system. So even we are going to see how do we create a change document object, and how do we integrate this change document object to workflow so that your workflow gets triggered within the system. All right, so this is what actually this slide talks. And people-driven process, as I said, people-centric people-centric process is nothing but from the it's most of the times every organizational unit, let's say assume your CSE itself is having an organization structure, right? So your manager, as a manager, he has his own set of responsibilities. Again, on top of your manager, he might have his own manager, and on top of his manager, he might have some business head and horizontal head and vertical head, and then CEO. There is a very hierarchy. So every organization will have its own set of organizational structure. Now, why I'm going to talk about this organizational structure in this point of view or in this context is that workflows are actually considered as an integral part of your organizational structure. Now, let's say your manager, let's consider a case that you and your manager, you're trying to apply a leave. Under your manager, he can have, let's say, 20 reportees or 20 sub-employees who has to report to him. So your manager is nothing but your line manager, and as an employee or as a as a subordinate, you are going to report to him. So whatever the request that you just create, he has to do it. Now, for example, let's say he resigned or he just left the company, and someone is going to replace the same position. So someone is going to come back. So in that case, now when you again try to create new leave request, when a new person comes and replaces your old manager, so it has to again go to this new person, but it should not go to the old person, right? So the organizational structure hierarchy actually considered when you are going to create a workflow also. Now, how do I integrate a workflow in the organizational structure? That is also we are going to see in this course. We have a set of transactions called PPOC, PPOM, right? So PPOF, right? So we have different transactions where you can include and say that, okay, whoever is holding this manager position, he is responsible of handling all the activities or all the tasks, whatever that you are going to assign by using workflows. All right. So that is the reason why we have a very in the workflows, in the SAP workflow development, organizational management or organizational structures plays a very important role. So the next decision, whenever you're going to define or whenever you are decided that you want to go ahead and implement workflows within any business process or any organization, the next after deciding all the 3 points, the next point that you have to understand is, the organization is going to does the organization have a valid organizational structure, or does the organization or the customer is really happy or is interested in making use of this existing organizational structure, and and he wants to integrate workflows within the organizational structure. There can be cases where the customers or the clients won't be interested in understanding or making use of their existing organizational structure. So in that case, how do you do that? They might maintain their set of users or people in a separate different table, in a custom table or in a Z table, and they might ask, as a workflow developer, they might ask you saying that you have to identify this person based on this rule. So how do you create rules? Rules are nothing but a place or a point where you write the logic of defining or identifying the right person. For instance, as you are an employee, you have whenever you submit a leave request within the workflow, you have a logic has to be written in such a way that always whatever the leave request that you submit, it has to go to your line manager only. So your line manager is the approver or the agent. We call, in workflow terms, we call them as agents. Okay, so the agent is your line manager, right? So in the workflow, you have to define a point. There should be a point where you can determine or write or implement a logic to identify your line manager as agent. So what is that place is called? We call it as rule. So rules are nothing but again separate development objects within the SAP system. In the way you create reports, the way you create classes, in the same way we also have a concept called rules, and that is also we are going to see within this workflow training program, saying that okay, how do you create rules and what are the different kinds of rules you have, and if in case you want to make use of organization structure within the rules, how do you associate organization structure in the rules, and how do you associate these rules within the workflow. So all these things we are going to look at in the course, right? The frequently used terms that, as I said, I'm going to show you how does and what are the different types of tasks that we have. So this is an image which I just try to refer from the standard documents that are available within the. There's a lot of disturbance. There's a lot of disturbance. I guess you have to mute your mic. All right. All right. No. All right. Just mute your mic. Hello. Can you hear me now? Okay. There's a disturbance in your mic, so just mute your mic. If you have any questions, just ping that in the things. Okay. All right, so in this slide, the takeaway from this slide is that you have to understand, is, as I said, that there is an inbox. So in SAP terms, in SAP business workflow terms, or in SAP environment, we have an inbox for every login. I guess you might already have a login within your client systems. So as soon as you provide your user ID and password and you just click on enter, so every user, whoever is holding a user ID within the SAP system, he will be allocated with a business workplace. So business workplace is nothing but your SAP inbox, the way in which your Gmail inbox have. In the same way, you have your SAP inbox. So what does this SAP inbox consist of is, well, is there any disturbance when I'm just trying to speak? Hello? Are you there? Praveen? Praveen, are you there? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
When I just unmuted this mic now, so that pop-up is coming, unmuted.
Okay, now I guess you should be, now I'm able to hear you clearly, okay?
Yeah.
There's no disturbance. All right.
Yeah. Yes.
So actually, I was just trying to talk to you about what a business workplace is. So if you have a credentials to log in within SAP system, so every user, whoever have credentials to log in within the SAP system, he is allocated with a set, a definite amount of inbox size or business workplace size. So business workplace is nothing but your SAP inbox. The way in which you have your Gmail or Yahoo inboxes, in the same way every SAP login will have your SAP business workplace or SAP inbox. So business workplace is a place or a storage area where all the activities or tasks or jobs, whatever that you have to do, it will be placed in your business workplace. So as soon as you log in, the first place that you have to check as a manager, or maybe your manager, as soon as he logs in, so as soon as you submit your leave request, so your leave request is placed in your manager's SAP business workplace. So what he might do is that he might just log into his system by using his credentials, and he just navigate to his SAP inbox or business workplace, and he just tries to open the leave request, whatever that you have created. Now, what is this work item? That anyways we are going to again come back from the right hand side. So I'm just trying to give you the first understanding, first row. So that is your business workplace. So the next thing is, what is workflow? You might usually come across the different terms like workflow template, workflow, and work item, and standard task. So there are different terms that are used. So don't get confused with all these terms. So workflow template is nothing but the design, and it doesn't have any runtime instances. Workflow template is just a definition, the way in which you define your class. Until unless you create a class, it won't have any instance. Right? Until unless you create an instance of your class, it is not considered as object. Right? In the same way, your class is nothing but a definition. In the same way, your workflow template is nothing but a definition. So here is a workflow template when your development or when your workflow is still in the process of development or building. So you create a workflow template and you start adding the different steps and functionalities and conditions. So there are different processes. Right, so workflow template is nothing but a definition of your whole business process, whatever that you are trying to deal with, or whatever the business process that you want to automate. All right. Now, when I say workflow, and now I'm talking about workflow. Workflow template is nothing but a definition. When I say workflow, workflow is nothing but the instance of your workflow template. So that means it holds some values. It will at runtime. You can just find out for which particular request or for which particular business object. Business object are nothing but, you can consider a business object is your material, your leave, your sales order, your purchase requisition, or your purchase order, or it can be creation of invoice. So everything is a business object. So a business object consists of set of different operations and data and attributes. So everything is a business object, right? Right. So when you just try to say a workflow is a runtime instance of workflow template. Right. So usually you see people talking about what is the workflow template number or what is the workflow ID. So workflow ID, workflow template number, both are one and the same. So don't get confused about it. Now, what is task? That is what actually your question, the question which you asked the beginning of the session was that tasks. Tasks are again of two types. Background task and dialog task. As I said, there can be some activities or operations or some set of activities that can be executed in the background. We don't require any manual intervention. For example, you submitted your leave request, and now if whether you have your leave quota available for that specific leave type or not, that your manager doesn't have to verify it. Right, your system can also verify it. So within the system, you might have a place or a table where your leave quota might be stored. So within the workflow, what you can do is like you can create a task where you can say that, okay, go and read this table and get the data and get the quota. And if the quota is less than 2 days or 1 day, then you don't want to go ahead and you just want to cancel the leave request. So that is a background task. But if you have a quota, then it has to go to your respective manager. So as soon as it reaches your manager, so the dialog task. So the manager opens your leave request. So which is nothing but a dialog task is nothing but a foreground activity or a foreground task. It can also be called as foreground activity or foreground step or background step, dialog task. Both are one and the same, so don't get confused. So these are the frequently used terms. Invariantly or contrastly, they use the same kind of things, but they are one and the same. Foreground task or dialog task are one and the same. So in the dialog task, what your manager does is that he just tries to open the leave request and he just approves it. He doesn't have to validate because it reached his inbox. That means you have already, the data has already been validated by a background process. So that means he doesn't have to validate it. All he just have to take action. Either he can approve or reject. If in case he is rejecting, either he can come back with his own set of comments saying that the reason of rejection, what are the reasons behind rejecting your leave request. So it can also be a separate task, right? So that is the difference between a task. A task is nothing but a logically related set of statements or maybe set of lines of code which you are trying to achieve a specific result. For example, as I said, understanding the quota or getting the quota information about your leaves for a specific leave. So where you write this piece of code, so it is written in your business object repository. So business object types, as I said, sales order. As I said, sales order, let's say you create a class for sales order, and within the sales order you say you create different methods. I'm talking from the class builder context, okay? I'm creating a class in which I want to deal with a sales order. Now, when I'm creating a sales order, what kind of attributes I can have for the sales order? I can have start date, end date, or maybe I can have sales order ID, and I can get the vendor information or the customer information, customer address. So all these are nothing but the attributes of my sales order. And then what kind of operations that I can perform, that I define them as methods: create, update, delete, change of address, change of sales order. There are so many other operations which you define them as methods. In the same way, you have a concept called business object repository. So the business object repository, basically earlier it was, when the SAP was on 4.7 or prior to that, basically business object repository, basically what they did is that they created these all master data objects from the context of SAP, like materials, sales order, everything. So after that they created a wrapper object type, and then they created set of operations that are possible on that specific business object. And then within that methods, what they did is that they might call some specific set of standard transactions, or they can have their own logic, or they may call some desktop applications like Word documents or something to save the information. So these are the different operations. So where do you write that logic is actually you are going to create a business object type, right? So this is the logic. So from here we are again going back. So this is the place where you write the logic and you write the method. So you create either a dialog task or a background task. And when you create a background task, you have different steps within the workflow: dialog step, background step. So you make use of these steps to include this task. So whenever you create a task within the system, ID gets generated. So you are going to make use of the same ID within your workflow template. And you say that you want to include a background step, and then you say that this is the ID that I want to include, or this is the task which I want to include as a background step. This is the ID which I want to make it as a foreground step or a dialog step, and this is the ID of that task. And later what you say is that at the runtime, so once you start the workflow, so every step, irrespective of whether it is a background task or a foreground task or a background foreground activity or a background activity, whatever it is, every step within the workflow will have a work item ID. A work item ID is nothing but runtime instance, 8-digit ID which is given for every step within the workflow. Okay, so workflow, when I say workflow, it is runtime. So even your workflow template will have a workflow ID. So all the workflows, all the work items which are dependent on the workflow ID are called as child work items, and for every step within the workflow there will be a parent work item. All right, so that is what a work item is. A work item is nothing but the 8-digit numeric digit, 8 digits of numeric number or ID which is given as soon as you start the workflow. So as you can see that here automatic execution of the background task. So if it is not a foreground activity, so every step, every background step will be executed by a different user. So how does, see, one thing I would like to say is whatever the tasks that you perform within the SAP system, either it can be a background job or you might have already scheduled a background different jobs, right? So even a background job has to be run on a specific username. Without username, nothing is done within the SAP system. So even when you are trying to execute a background task within the workflow, a workflow will have its own background user ID, which again we are going to see what is that user ID and how do we enable this workflow environment. So this user ID actually comes into the picture when we are going to enable the workflow environment within the SAP system. By default, I'm just trying to give you a small hint that a tip. By default, whenever you bring a new SAP system or a box and say that, okay, you are going to use this SAP system within your landscape, so what does it mean that by default workflow environment is not enabled in any SAP system? You have to enable it for the clients. If every system will have different number of clients, 100, 200, 400, pre-production, production, quality, unit testing, development. So you have different clients, right? So each and every client has to be enabled. So the enablement of workflow itself is again a different activity, which as a workflow consultant you have to understand it. So again, we are going to see how do we enable this workflow environment and what are the different attributes and where do you say what should be the number range of your custom workflows or Z workflows, whatever that you are going to create. All right. And next thing is that here finally I would like to say, as I said, rules and agent assignment, both are one and the same. Rules is a place or a development object which we are going to say that this is the how actually you have to identify, or it's a set of lines of code which you are going to create to determine or identify the agent. Now, if in case you are going to make use of organizational management or organizational structure, so you can just go ahead and directly assign your dialog steps directly to one of the organizational object types. We have different organizational object types, like let's say organizational unit, job, and position, user, role. So you have different object types within the organizational structure or within the HR structure of any organization. So even we are going to understand how do we create an organizational structure and how do we make use of this organizational structure to integrate within the workflows, or how do we integrate workflows within this organizational structure. That is also we are going to see in the course. So with that, I would like to just give you we have already spoken about more about the same things, like how do we make use of these existing workflows and everything. So the next thing that we are going to see is simple demo. Before I go to demo, if you have any questions you can talk, and otherwise we'll just go back to the system and look at the demo.
Okay, no problem, we can go.
Okay, so first thing, as I said, before we start talking about workflows, or before we go ahead and start working with the workflows, what is the first place that we have to navigate and check as your SW3 transaction. So this is the place where you are going to actually enable your workflow environment. As you can see that already, because within the system I have already maintained the workflow configuration, so that is the reason why everything is in green. All right, so we are not going to deal with guided processes. Basically, guided processes dealt in from the context of SAP from Java stack. So basically, when you talk about SAP system or SAP NetWeaver architecture, it comes with two stacks. One is your ABAP stack and one is your Java stack. Right. Okay. So when we talk about guided processes basically dealt from your Java stack. So that means it has its own set of development environment. It has its own set of applications where how to create and workflows. It is entirely different. So we are not going to deal with anything from Java stack. So guided processes, basically these are obsolete. We are not using anymore nowadays these guided processes. So you don't have to worry about it. All right. But what we are going to understand in this automatic workflow customization is that we have different attributes and methods that we are going to look at, and I'll just make you sure understand what are the different things that you have over here. There are some set of activities that are automatic, and there are some set of activities which are manual, and we will be going through all these steps in order to make you understand how do we enable these all steps. I'll go through it, but this is the first place that before you develop any workflow, the first thing that any basis consultant or there can be some cases where as a workflow consultant you may go ahead and get in touch with the basis guys to help them to understand or to configure or enable this workflow customization. Usually, as a workflow developer, you won't be having the access to this transaction, but there can be possibility that they might basis guys may come back to you and ask your opinion or ask your inputs, like what is the way how you want to enable this workflow environment within that specific client. I'm just trying to insist on the word client. This activity is independent to the client. You cannot transport these activities by saving them in any of the workbench or customizing requests. Okay, so this has to be done independently for every client based on the number of clients that you have within your system landscape. Right? So this is what we are going to, first thing is that you have to enable this workflow environment. And the next thing is, how do we navigate to the workflow builder? There's a transaction called SWDD, and you can just navigate to your transaction SWDD to show how a workflow builder looks. So workflow builder is nothing but a place, a kind of IDE where you have a possibility of creating, changing, checking for the errors, and executing, and yeah. So the different possibilities, whatever that you can do of creating, changing, activating, deactivating, creating versions, everything is actually done from within your workflow builder. So this is a place where you actually, where most of the workflow consultants will be working most of their times in designing the workflow. This is what I call it as a workflow template. So this is just in the design phase. All right. So as you can see that, how does it look like? It has different sections. So what are the different types of steps that you can use? It is already shown over here. So if you can just have to create a new step, so all you have to just right click, and you can see that what are the different steps that are available within the system. Everything are actually available from within your workflow builder, right? So this is first place, and this is the second place which you are going to see. And I was just keen to make you show you that how does your business workplace looks. So to navigate to your business workplace, there is a transaction called SBWP. So you can just navigate to your SAP business, SAP inbox, right? And you can see there are set of work items or tasks which are already available in my inbox, right? So how do, irrespective of, as I said, as soon as you log in, you just see a screen like something like this with SAP menu and your favorites. So the icon which is on the top of your favorites bar, a kind of bread or a kind of slice, which you can see a cheese slice, SAP Business Workplace. So if you just click it, you are again going to the same place. So the transaction, I just gave you a transaction SBWP. All right, so that is what your business workplace looks like. So again, in this you have different things. So where you can say that, all right, so if in case you are going for a leave, or then in that case you can just go ahead and maintain your automatic reply. And if in case you are looking to forward some information automatically for a set of days, then in that case you can configure within this. So there are so many activities and features which we are going to understand. So, but for time being, what we do is that we are going back and we'll just try to create a very simple workflow with one simple decision step. And I would like to just show you how does our workflow looks like at the runtime. All right. So as I already said, we have one transaction to navigate to workflow builder called SWDD, but there are different possible transactions. For example, here I'm just trying to make use of a transaction called PFTC_INS. So if in case I just click on it, so I'm just again going ahead and creating a new workflow template. So I just go ahead and create a new workflow template. And here is a place which I just give some name. Session 1. Right, so alright, so I'm just going to save this. So as soon as I click on save, so it just tries to ask the package, or whether you want to include this in a development class or any local object. So you can just go ahead and create, and then you can just go ahead and click on workflow builder, and with this you are again going back to the same workflow builder transactions. Now what is the difference between SWDD and PFTC_INS? That is what I'm going to say you now. So usually what happens is, in SWDD, whenever you just try to navigate to the workflow builder as in SWDD, so sometimes there is a chance that at every point of time whenever you execute SWDD, it opens in a change mode. So even if you are trying to open a standard workflow, it just opens in the change mode. And if unfortunately you just try to delete, or unexpectedly something may happen and you delete it, so the standard workflow is gone. right? So obviously the best way to navigate to the standard workflow templates is navigate to pftc_dis. There is one more transaction called display, and the way in which I just tried to create pftc_ins, in the same way we have one more transaction called pftc_dis. So navigate to that, choose the task type as workflow template, and then give the standard workflow template over there, and then you just open it and navigate to the workflow builder, right? So here we created a workflow template. So how do I include a decision step? So how does a decision step looks like? So I have a standard step, and I'm just going to make use of this decision step, and I say step.
So here you're just now creating the hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're now you are just creating the Z workflow, right?
Exactly. All right, so what I've done over here is I've just given like who has to receive this. I said, if you remember, if you try to recollect the things which we have already discussed, so I said we can associate rules. So where do I associate this rule? So here is a place. I choose rule and I give a ID or the name of that rule over here. And I'd say that, okay, you make use of this rule and get me the agent, so that this user decision is something, is always a dialog step or a foreground activity. Don't forget about it. So user decision is always a foreground step. So what we do is that we just try to, say that for time being, what we are trying to do is like whoever initiates the workflow, we are just trying to send it. So WF_initiator is nothing but workflow initiator. All right, so I just gave some two options saying approve and reject. So these are two different outcomes. So I'm just going to save this. So as soon as I just click on enter, so it just tried to give me two outcomes. So it started building the workflow. We are in the phase of building the workflow. All right, so that's it. So let's try to conclude this. I'm just trying to save. As I said, within the workflow builder, you can create, you can change, you can check the consistency, and you can see over here in warnings. So if there are any warnings, so this is the place where you have to actually see. All right, so let's try to go back and does this workflow. All right, so there's one more option which I have to deactivate, which I'm going to discuss this within the course. Why I just deactivated this, I'll discuss this within the course. All right, so since this is a demo, I just tried to deactivate it, and I'm going to activate this. So my workflow is activated successfully, and I'm going to execute this. And I'm just trying to click on refresh organizational environment, and I click on execute. So as you can see in the status bar that the task is started on the work item ID. As I said, every workflow template, and as soon as you run, a work item or a workflow gets generated, and every workflow will have a work item ID. So as you can see, 1190646 is the work item ID which got generated. So where do I check it? So there is a transaction called SWI1, and here you just go ahead and give 1190646. I hope if I'm not wrong. Yep. As you can see, so this is how your workflow started. So this is your workflow. So it says every workflow will have a work item ID. So as you saw already in the screenshot, which I just mentioned as a terminology screenshot. So as you can see that every step within the workflow is associated with the work item ID, and there is a task associated with every step. So the task over here is 8267, which is a standard decision step. And what we did is that we just tried to make use of the standard step when we created a decision step. So by default that is included by the system. So you don't have to worry about it. All right, so how do you create a background task? That is again a different step called activity. And in that case, you are going to associate your custom task ID with that. All right, so this is how your workflow looks like at runtime. And there are many more things. I just gave you a very sneak peek of how does it look like at runtime. And to just give you a final concluding thing, we are just navigating to SAP inbox to see whether the work item, whatever that we created, has reached or not. So this is the one which we created, sample decision step. I say approve and reject. Okay, as you can see, this is there is a typo error saying that REGECTE. rejectee, right? So you can either approve it, you can reject it, or you can just cancel and keep the work item in your inbox. So as soon as you send your leave request to your manager, so he can just open his work item from this place, SAP inbox, and he can either approve or reject. Again, this is just to give you an example, because again, when we talk about leave workflow, it again uses different tasks, and it again uses different ways of presenting the information to the end user. It uses basically a WebDynPro app application. So how do we configure a task with WebDynPro application? That is also we are going to see within this course. We have a set of transactions which we have to go and customize it, and we have to do it, right? So if in case he approves it, so you want to send a notification to the approver or the initiator of the request. So how do I do that? So again, there are different possibilities. Either you can make use of standard mail step, or you can just make use of some BCS classes, or you can create, or you have a special customization within the workflow environment, which is again a set of customizations that you have to go through to make you understand how can you send a external notification as soon as you approve or reject, or as soon as any work item gets created within the system with respect to any specific task. So everything can be configured, and this is also we are going to look at within the course. All right, so just to give you a confirmation whether the things that we are doing are right or wrong. So let's go back and let's look at the the task, whatever that we created just right now. It's all right. All right, so as you can see, it is the same work item, rejectee typo error. So that is what I have on the session. If you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll conclude it.